Picture this. You're Gandalf the Grey. You've just sent a hobbit carrying the most dangerous object in creation on a journey through enemy territory. And you've arranged for him to meet a mysterious ranger in a tavern, a scruffy, weather-beaten man who sits in shadows and goes by the name Strider. Now, you could tell the hobbit, by the way, that ranger, he's actually the rightful king of Gondor, the heir of Isildur, and the most important human alive. But you don't. You leave a cryptic poem and vanish into the night. Everyone who's watched the films remembers that scene at the Prancing Pony. Frodo and his friends huddled in a corner, eyeing this strange ranger with deep suspicion while Strider smirks from the shadows. We've all asked the same question. Why didn't Gandalf just tell them? Here's what makes this brilliant, and what most viewers never realize. Gandalf's silence wasn't an oversight. It wasn't because he forgot, or because Tolkien needed dramatic tension. It was one of the most calculated strategic decisions in the entire story, rooted in wisdom so profound that it touches on questions of burden, trust, and the very nature of knowledge itself. Today, we're going deep into Gandalf's mind, into the reasons, both practical and philosophical, why he concealed Aragorn's identity from Frodo. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll see that scene at Bree in a completely different light. Let's start with what actually happens, because the text is even more deliciously tense than the film captures. When Frodo first meets Strider at the Prancing Pony, here's what Tolkien writes, and this is from The Fellowship of the Ring, Book 1. "I am called Strider," he answered, and a tall ranger came forward from the shadows by the wall. "And if by my life or death I can save you, I will. Now, if you're..." "Frodo, what do you see?" "A weather-worn man in travel-stained clothes, lurking in the corner of a tavern, who somehow knows your name and claims he can save you." Sam's reaction tells you everything you need to know about how unsettling this was. "How do we know you are the Strider that Gandalf speaks about?" he demanded. "I have seen no sign that you are anything more than a ranger of the wild, and they come and go unmarked. Unmarked. Untrustworthy." And here's the thing that makes my heart ache for Aragorn in this moment. He does tell them his real name. Right there in the Prancing Pony, he says, "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn. And if by life or death I can save you, I will." But the name means nothing to them. It's just another name. Exotic, perhaps, but no more meaningful than Strider. They have no context, no framework to understand what they're hearing. Tolkien writes that Frodo's face showed no trust. Can you imagine the loneliness of that? You're the heir to the throne of Gondor, the 39th in the line of kings, stretching back 3,000 years to the glory of Numenor itself. And you introduce yourself by your true name to a hobbit from the Shire, who looks at you like you might steal his handkerchiefs. But wait, didn't Gandalf leave something for them? "All that is gold does not glitter. Not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither. Renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king." Now, here's what makes this poem so perfectly. Gandalf, it tells them everything and nothing simultaneously. The crownless again shall be king. That's pretty explicit. But explicit to whom? To Frodo, who knows nothing of the line of Elendil or the lost kingdom of Arnor or why any of this matters. It's just beautiful verse that vaguely suggests Strider is more than he appears. Gandalf gave them just enough to trust their instincts, but not enough to understand the stakes. And this is where it gets fascinating, because this wasn't accident or oversight. According to Tolkien's letters, and this is from letter 156, Gandalf acted always with great care, revealing what was necessary and no more, for he understood that knowledge itself could be a burden or a weapon in the wrong hands or at the wrong time. So let's unpack that. What did Gandalf understand that we need to understand? Why was it necessary to keep Frodo in the dark? First, let's talk about burden. You know what Frodo was carrying. The One Ring, the concentrated will of Sauron himself, growing heavier with every step toward Mordor, whispering promises and threats, slowly corroding the mind and spirit of whoever bore it. Tolkien tells us, in letter 144, that Gandalf understood that to bear the ring was burden enough for Frodo. To add to that the knowledge of great kings and ancient lineages, of claims to thrones and the politics of the world beyond the Shire, this would only weigh upon a heart that must remain focused on one terrible task. Think about what that knowledge would have meant. Suddenly, this ranger isn't just your guide. He's the king of Gondor, and his entire future, the restoration of his kingdom, the hopes of all the free peoples rest partly on your success. Every time you falter, every time you're tempted by the ring, you're not just risking yourself, you're risking the kingship. And here's the beautiful psychological insight. Frodo didn't need to know. His task was clear. Carry the ring to Rivendell. Trust Strider to guide you. Focus on the next step, the next mile, the next day. The grand sweep of history, the restoration of kingdoms, the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, none of that helped him put one foot in front of the other through the wilderness. In fact, it would have done the opposite. It would have made the journey feel impossibly large, impossibly significant, impossibly real in ways a hobbit from the Shire couldn't possibly process while also bearing the ring. Gandalf understood something profound about human nature, or in this case, hobbit nature. Sometimes less knowledge makes us stronger, not weaker. This isn't about keeping people ignorant. It's about respecting the limits of what a person can carry, both physically and mentally. Gandalf, as Tolkien writes in The Return of the King, believed that it is not our part to master all the tides of the world, but to do what is in us for the succor of those years wherein we are set. Do what is in us, not what is beyond us. Not the whole weight of history, but our part in it. So Gandalf gave Frodo exactly what he could handle: a mission, a guide, and a cryptic poem that hinted at greatness without crushing him under the weight of dynasties. But there's another reason for the secrecy, and this one is darker, much darker. Let's talk about Sauron. The thing about Sauron is that he remembers everything. He remembers the last alliance of elves and men. He remembers the stroke of Narsil that cut the ring from his finger. And he remembers, with burning hatred across 3,000 years, the name. Isildur, son of Elendil. From Unfinished Tales, we get this chilling detail. For long years, the enemy has sought the heir of Isildur. He remembers the defeat at the hands of Elendil and his sons, and he knows that from that line comes one who shall cast him down. Cast him down. That's not speculation, that's prophecy. And Sauron knows it. So imagine you're Gandalf, and you know that somewhere in Middle-earth walks the one man whose very existence is a threat to the Dark Lord. Not because of any ring he carries, not because of any army he commands, but because of the blood in his veins and the destiny written in the stars. What do? You hide him. According to The Return of the King, he was Aragorn's son of Arathorn, the 39th heir in the right line from Isildur, and yet more like to Elendil than any before him. Yet he wore in the wild the raiment of the Dunedain, going forth under the name of Thorongil, and later as Strider of the North. Thus he kept his lineage hidden from the eye of Sauron. Thorongil, Strider. Aragorn itself is just one of many names he'd used. The man had been in deep cover for his entire adult life. And here's where Gandalf's genius becomes clear. The fewer people who knew Aragorn's identity, the safer he was. Not because people would betray him, though that was a risk, but because knowledge can be extracted. Tolkien makes this explicit in The Fellowship of the Ring, when Gandalf warns, "The wise speak only of what they know. Even to your friends you should not speak of all that you know or suspect, for walls have ears and enemies have spies." Sauron's reach was growing. If even one of those Black Riders had caught Frodo alone and learned that the scruffy ranger guiding him was the heir of Isildur. From Unfinished Tales, the Dark Lord seeks ever for the line of Elendil, for he knows that from that line comes one who shall cast him down. Think about the strategic calculation here. Gandalf had to balance two catastrophic risks: Frodo, not trusting Strider enough to follow him, versus Frodo knowing too much if he was captured. And Gandalf chose the former risk over the latter. He chose to let Frodo doubt, rather than let him carry information that could destroy everything. That's not just strategy. That's the kind of cold, clear-eyed wisdom that makes you realize why Gandalf was chosen as one of the Astari in the first place. But there's still one more layer to this, and it's the one that makes me love Tolkien's psychology most of all. Here's what Gandalf understood that most people miss. Frodo had to make his own decision about Strider. From Tolkien's Letter 131, Gandalf knew that Frodo must learn to judge character and trust his instincts. By not revealing Aragorn's true identity beforehand, the wizard forced the hobbits to make their own decision about whether to trust Strider. This was part of their education, for they could not rely on Gandalf forever. Part of their education. Think about what Gandalf was preparing Frodo for. Not just the journey to Rivendell. That was the tutorial level. He was preparing him for the real quest. Carrying the ring into Mordor itself, walking into the land of the enemy with no wizard, no army, no guarantee of success. For that journey, Frodo would need to trust his own judgment. He would need to be able to look at Sam, at Gollum, at strangers and allies, and decide for himself who to trust and when. If Gandalf had said, "Trust Strider because I told you to," what would that teach? Obedience, sure, but not wisdom. Instead, Gandalf gave Frodo something harder and more valuable. A test. Look at this ranger. He seems dangerous. He knows things he shouldn't know. He sits in shadows. He speaks of perils you don't understand. Do you trust him? And here's the magnificent thing Frodo did. Not immediately, not blindly, but through observation and experience. He saw how Strider handled the ring wraiths at Weathertop. He saw the care with which the ranger treated his wound. He saw, gradually, that beneath the rough exterior was someone trustworthy. By the time they reached Rivendell, Frodo had earned his trust in Aragorn. He hadn't just accepted someone else's judgment, he'd formed his own. And then, only then, came the revelation. At the Council of Elrond, when all the leaders of the Free Peoples were gathered, Tolkien gives us this moment. Then Aragorn stood forth, and casting back his hood he showed the green stone that hung upon his breast. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, and am called Elisar, the Elfstone, Dunedain, the heir of Isildur Elendil, son of Gondor. Here is the sword that was broken and is forged again." And Frodo's reaction? From the Fellowship of the Ring, Frodo looked at him in astonishment. "Then all that Strider said at Bree was true," he said. "You are the heir of Elendil and the keeper of the sword. All that Strider said was true. Not, 'Oh, this changes everything.' Not, 'I should have known.' Just a quiet confirmation that his judgment, his hard-won, earned through experienced judgment, was correct. That's character development, folks. That's a hobbit from the Shire learning to navigate a world vastly more complex than anything he'd imagined. And notice when the revelation came. Unfinished Tales tells us. It was only at the Council of Elrond, when all the chief leaders of the resistance to Sauron were gathered, that Aragorn's full identity was revealed to Frodo. This was the first moment when such knowledge became necessary, when the quest was determined and the fellowship to be formed. The first moment it became necessary. Not convenient, not dramatic, necessary. Because Gandalf understood something about information that we often forget. Timing matters just as much as truth. So let's pull all these threads together, because what we're really talking about here is one of Tolkien's deepest themes. The wisdom of restraint. Gandalf could have told Frodo everything. The heir of Isildur, the lost kingdom of Arnor, the prophesied king, the whole sweeping saga. But he didn't. He could have revealed Aragorn's identity immediately, overwhelming any doubt with the weight of destiny and kingship. But he didn't. Instead, he did something much harder. He held back. From the Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf's own philosophy. There is much that I could tell you, but will not. Time presses, and there is much yet to do. Knowledge is a burden that grows heavier with each revelation. Some things are best learned when they must be learned, and not before, when they must be learned. Not when we're curious. Not when it would be convenient. When the knowledge becomes necessary for the task at hand. This is profoundly counter to how we usually think about information. We live in an age where more information is always assumed to be better, where transparency is a virtue and secrets are suspect. But Tolkien, through Gandalf, suggests something different. That wisdom sometimes means withholding information, not for manipulation or control, but out of love and understanding for what people can actually carry. Think about the 3 reasons we've explored. First, Gandalf protected Frodo from an unnecessary burden. The ring was enough. Adding the weight of kingship and destiny would have crushed a hobbit who needed to stay focused on one step at a time. Second, he protected Aragorn from the Dark Lord's attention. The fewer who knew, the safer the Heir of Isildur remained. Secrecy wasn't paranoia. It was survival strategy against an enemy who could extract information from captured minds. Third, he gave Frodo the gift of making his own judgment. By forcing the hobbit to trust his instincts rather than Gandalf's authority, the wizard prepared him for a journey where he'd have to rely on his own wisdom. 3 reasons. Burden management, security, character development. And here's what makes this very Tolkien. These aren't just practical reasons. They're philosophical reasons rooted in his deepest beliefs about wisdom, responsibility, and what it means to guide others. From letter 156, Tolkien writes that Gandalf was wiser than any other person in Middle-earth in the Third Age. His wisdom came from long experience and deep thought. But notice, he doesn't say Gandalf was wiser because he knew more. He says Gandalf was wiser because he understood what to reveal and when. That's the kind of wisdom we don't often celebrate. We celebrate the sage who knows everything, the mentor who explains everything, the teacher who lays it all out. Tolkien celebrates something rarer, the wisdom of silence. The wisdom of trusting that people can find their own way if you give them just enough light to see the next step. The wisdom of less. And you know what? It worked. Frodo made it to Rivendell. He learned to trust his judgment. Aragorn's identity remained hidden until the moment it needed to be revealed. The fellowship formed with everyone understanding what they were actually signing up for. That scruffy ranger in the corner of the Prancing Pony became the king of Gondor, and the hobbit who doubted him became the ring-bearer who saved Middle-earth. All because a wizard knew when to speak and when to stay silent. So the next time you watch that scene at Bree, Frodo nervous, Sam suspicious, Strider smirking from the shadows, remember what's really happening. You're not watching a plot convenience or dramatic tension for its own sake. You're watching a masterclass in wisdom, watching Gandalf teach without words, protect without revealing, and trust that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is let them figure it out themselves. Gandalf never told Frodo about Aragorn's identity because Frodo didn't need to know. Not yet. Not when knowledge would be burden, danger, and obstacle rather than help. He waited until the moment when that knowledge transformed from weight into wonder. The moment at the Council of Elrond when Frodo realized that the ranger he'd learned to trust was also the king he'd learned to believe in. That's not just good storytelling. That's Tolkien showing us something true about wisdom, about teaching, about the profound responsibility of deciding what to share and when. And it's a reminder that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the wisest thing we can say is nothing at all. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.